They found and actually took samples of coal from around the world. Every single one of them had carbon-14 in them, no matter where they were in the geologic record. Didn't matter where they were. My fellow counterpart, creationist counterpart, Dr. Russell Humphreys, as well as the gentleman who did the original research, Dr. John Baumgartner, both put in a little bit of input here because some skeptics have said, oh, the carbon-14 is just modern-day contamination. Well, if they had read the process, first of all, they would have read that they had taken or collected roughly 115 liters worth of volume of coal. They took it out, they stuffed it in a barrel, filled the barrel with argon, and capped it so no air could get in. They did that right off the bat. That rules out contamination. But you know what? Let's give them that for a second. Let's assume that not only was it contaminated, it absorbed 115 liters of air, of modern air. Absolutely impossible, but let's assume that. If you do the math, currently we are getting values of 0.2 to 0.4 parts of the modern, or a percentage of modern carbon. In other words, today's value of carbon-14, we're getting 0.2 to 0.4% in the coal, no matter where we get it from. So there's lots of C14 there, lots. But if we assume that the coal sample was contaminated by an equal volume of modern air, that would increase the total PMC count by a whopping 0.0001%. Clearly, it makes absolutely no difference, and clearly these numbers are ridiculous. There should be no C14 in oil. This tells us clearly the coal is young. It's not millions of years old. It is at best a few tens of thousands, at best. Now, again, this is found throughout the entire rock record that contains fossils. There's tons of samples of it. Radiometric dating, which I'm now going to get into, that's where we get all the millions or billions of years for the rocks. That is the dating method that says these rocks are millions or billions of years old. We got a problem here. Which one is correct? Carbon-14 dates give the same date throughout the whole rock record as being less than 100,000 years old. All the radiometric dating methods, as you go deeper, say it's older and older by hundreds or billions of years. Which one is right? Well, let's take a quick look at a couple examples. These are radio halos in coal. Now, what this is, the coal was originally wood, and it soaked up some water. Some of that water had things like uranium in it, radioactive materials. And so the uranium penetrates into the wood and sits there in pockets, and as it breaks down radioactively, it actually leaves a radiation damage ring, like that. So it actually makes a halo in the wood. We can thin section it, we can actually look at the radio halos in the wood today, what is now coal. Shortly after the wood was infiltrated by water, it was squished and compressed into coal. So some of the radio halos were flattened. Now, some of those radio halos, after squishing, the nuclear center kept breaking down radioactively and produced a round ring on top of the flattened one. Are you with me so far? So far, so good. Okay. Here's the catch. Now, this was written by Dr. Gentry and I think about 5 other scientific authors and publishers. Okay? The thing is, the samples that they took were from the Triassic, Jurassic, and Eocene. The youngest these are supposed to be is 37 million years old, according to conventional geologic ages. The oldest is 245 million years old. That's the conventional ages. Now, here's the catch. There's not enough radioactivity to fill in all that time. In other words, there's been so little radioactivity that has gone on here. Here's what Gentry said. Such extraordinary values admit the possibility that both the initial, I'll translate this in a second for you, okay? Both the initial uranium infiltration and coalification could possibly have occurred within the past several thousand years. Let me translate that for you. All three layers were laid down and compressed within the past several thousand years. Noah's flood happened roughly 4,500 years ago, according to the scriptures. Conventional geology says it was 37 to 245 million years ago these layers were laid down. These radio halos just showed that that was completely false. So once again, when we take a look at different dating methods, they don't agree. Everything is pointing to a young Earth. Now, what about that radiometric dating? I'm only going to come up with one example here, one specific case, and it's in the Grand Canyon. Now, I'm going to get the kids to think about this logically for a second, if you can. Did you figure out what that is yet? No? You think you know? A dinosaur molar. No, you're close. Uh-huh. A mammoth tooth. It's a mammoth molar. So make sure the parents get to see that too, okay? Have you guys seen Mammy the mammoth in Ice Age? Yes. Oh, yeah. That's his tooth. I pulled it personally. No, I didn't. Okay. Anyway, the Grand Canyon, see if the kids can figure this out. Okay, take a close look here. You see that line right there? That is actually a rock layer. Okay, it's actually a lava flow. You know, you've seen video of lavas, molten rock coming out of the ground? That is actually a molten rock layer that was then buried underneath the Grand Canyon. Okay? After the Grand Canyon was made, another lava flow up here poured down into the canyon. So which lava flow is older? That one or that one? The bottom one? Yeah. Okay, why do you say that? It was there first. It was there first. Okay, does everybody agree with that? No, they all do, obviously. Okay, excellent. Well, we have a unanimous vote up here. Okay. Obviously, that is the older layer. However, when we radiometrically dated the two lava flows, take a look at what happened. In particular, you'll notice that the vast majority of the ages of the top one were older than the lower ones. In particular, rubidium-strontium isochron is supposed to be one of the most reliable methods of radiometric dating available today. It gave an age of 1.34 billion years for that lava flow, while only giving 1.07 billion years for the lower one. It's topsy-turvy. The ages are completely backwards. However, the evolutionists then turn around and just say, oh, well, it's contaminated or whatever. There's been some mistake happened. Well, there's been multiple dating methods used, and they're quite consistent. This one quite consistently dates older than that one. But in the words of John Woodmorapee, in this book right here, which I would highly recommend, it's a little technical, but still pretty good, easy reading for the layman, The Mythology of Modern Dating Methods. I love the way John writes and the way he researches. This is how he summed it up. Because I just liked it, I'm just going to quote him. If uniformitarians are free to reject dates that don't fit their ideas, then so are the creationist scientists. The evolutionists themselves are rejecting these dates. Well, then, we're going to reject them too. Just on different grounds. Okay, last thing. These little crystals are called zircons. Now, you find these in granite rock, and these were actually taken up from a big drill that was put down into New Mexico granite, brought up, and inside them they have uranium. The uranium, of course, breaks down radioactively into lead, Pb2O6. For every atom of uranium that breaks down into lead, it gives off 8 helium atoms. Have you guys seen a helium balloon before? The kinds that float? Okay, same stuff. It gives off helium, okay? Now, what happens to your balloon after, if you've had a helium balloon before, I'm assuming? What happens if you leave it off in the corner for a few days? Before it pops. It falls and it shrivels up? Like that? This is my good friend Professor Emmy Clark's birthday balloon. It didn't last very long. Here's why it shrinks. The helium atom is so small, it actually goes right through the plastic or rubber. That's how small it is. And it's the same with the zircon crystals. It's so small it leaks right out of the zircon crystal. So here's the catch. What they did, the rate group took a whole pile of these samples, and they made two predictions. So basically, if you can picture this, they can measure how much radioactivity is gone on in the crystal. They can estimate how much helium has been produced. They can measure how much helium is left. And they can estimate how fast it's been leaking out. So they made two estimates on how fast it's leaking out, one based on a very old, 2 billion year old rock, the other based on the assumption that the rock is only 6,000 years old. They then went and actually had labs measure the helium rate. Guess what they found? Here's the results. It is, on the purple line, it is bang on the 6,000-year-old age. Now here's the corollary to that. There has been supposedly billions of years of radioactivity that has gone on in that crystal. The rock is young. It's only 6,000 years old. But 1 billion years of radioactivity has gone on. That means radioactive decay rates in the past were faster than they are today. We just took all radiometric dating methods and threw them out the window. Scientifically. You see, the anti-creationists frequently criticized us and said, well, you're just poking holes in our theories. Why don't you come up with your own dating method? So they did. Yeah, how convenient. Now, who cares about all this? Here's why it matters. Anybody recognize the name Charles Templeton? I'm curious. One does. Two? A couple. Okay. Charles Templeton was a contemporary to Billy Graham. He was actually a very well-known, very successful evangelist. He actually preached to crowds of up to 30,000 people, had thousands of people saved in his evangelistic meetings. Later on, however, he had a conversion and converted to atheism. Later on, wrote the book Farewell to God, My Reasons for Rejecting the Christian Faith. Guess where it all started? The age of the earth. Because he realized all these scientists have this evidence that shows that the earth is old and that Noah's flood never happened. That means the Bible is wrong, which means Jesus Christ was wrong, which means the salvation message is wrong. Sadly, Charles Templeton is now dead. I'm sure he is no longer an atheist. Unfortunate, but true. The age of the earth is critical to the gospel message, and most people don't realize it. But this morning I want to touch on the idea that dinosaurs and humans actually coexisted. And I want to expose a number of evolutionary assumptions that, I don't know about you, but at least I was programmed to believe these evolutionary assumptions. For example, I don't know about you, but I was taught that people in the past were not as smart as we are now. Well, we're going to see some evidence that perhaps maybe that's a little arrogant or egotistical, certainly incorrect. There's a lot of things we see in the past that we still can't explain today, even with our most modern technology. Okay, according to evolution, on the concept of dinosaurs and humans living together, dinosaurs became extinct roughly 60 million years ago, give or take. 60 million years before humans ever evolved. So, there is no question about it. Dinosaurs and humans, according to evolution, never, ever saw each other. Ever. That's from the evolutionary perspective. From the biblical perspective, dinosaurs and humans were created on day 5 and 6 of the creation week, roughly 6,000 years ago. Now that's key because we just spotted a huge contrast between the two models that we can now study scientifically and examine. So let's take a look at what the two models do. Oh, and this is important too, I forgot about this. Man was originally created perfect. In other words, the death, sickness, and disease we have now came after the fact. This is not part of the original plan. This was a consequence of the curse, a consequence of the fall. And thus, people were more intelligent than we are today. Now, if you were here the first night, you heard me talking, I'm a member of Mensa, so you got to be like this super genius IQ to be a member, right? Well, the whole concept of intelligence, most people think it has to do with knowledge. It's not knowledge. It's how fast you think. So it's not knowledge-based, it's the speed of thought is what it is. It's how quickly you comprehend, how quickly you learn, how quickly you think. That's the measure of intelligence. So people were more intelligent in the past. They thought faster. And as I always jokingly say, just being a genius just means you realize you did something stupid faster than the average person, okay? You think faster. You realize, oh man, I'm in West Virginia. I'm not supposed to be in West Virginia. I think it took a wrong turn somewhere, okay? I figured that out pretty quick. Now, I mentioned this the first night. I just want to cover this in a little more detail. I actually have a replica of this. That is my replica. I leave it at home because, let's face it, it looks like a bomb. And I don't want to scare the nice border and customs officials, okay? So I leave it at home when I travel into the U.S. However, this is the Baghdad battery. And it really is a battery. Now, there's a copper tube. Get this. This copper tube was hammered into a tube. It was soldered together with 60-40 lead-tin solder. It has an iron rod in the middle. Get a load of that. That's 4 metals that they have refined and learned to use. Lead, tin, copper, and iron. They put it all together in this clay vessel, which then, again, even with my replicas, you can fill them with grape juice or vinegar, and they produce electricity. Nobody really knows what they were for, but it's well known that in Egypt, they actually electroplated some of their artifacts. And so they suggest perhaps this was used for electroplating or whatever. But again, 4 metals, very carefully refined. They figured out how to make solder and how to solder. I mean, that alone is just mind-blowing. This battery is supposed to be 300 years before the time of Christ. People were not stupid back then, contrary to what we've been taught, contrary to what we've been led to believe. This is just one example of ancient technology. Now, one of the children asked the other night, what's this poster over here for? This is actually a clay figurine that was brought up in a well many moons ago. It was found in Nampa, Idaho, 1889. The whole doll, it's a clay doll, it's actually only about this tall. It's only about 1.5 inches or so. But it's a clay doll. It was brought up when they were drilling, they were drilling out a Cartesian well, is what they were doing. And this came up in the sand coming out of the well, the sand pump. As the sand was coming out of the sand pump, one of the workers was putting his hand like this, and what he thought was a twig fell into his hand. So he pulled it out, cleaned it off, and it wasn't a twig, it was a clay figurine. Now here's the catch. This was from 800 feet below the surface. It was underneath a layer of lava. This is supposed to be tertiary sediments, which are supposed to be dated, evolutionarily speaking, between 1.8 and 5 million years old. At best, modern people really didn't start showing up until perhaps 1 million years ago. So intelligent people weren't around, according to evolutionary dogma. But not only were intelligent people not around, how'd they know what people were going to look like to make a clay figurine after? You can't. It just can't be done. It makes no sense unless these were simply flood sediments, and this is simply a pre-flood artifact, which is what I genuinely think it is. Now, this is an interesting skeleton. There were actually 2 of them found. Does anybody recognize this or know what it is? Basically, you can tell it's a human skeleton. Nobody knows about this. The reason you don't know about it is because that skeleton is locked away in the basement at the London Museum of Natural History. It's been locked away there for 50, 60 years, a century. I'm not sure exactly when they pulled it out. But it was found in 1812 on the island of Guadalupe. There was actually 2 skeletons. They were both women, completely modern. Absolutely completely modern. However, and it was, by the way, it was on display in the British Museum of Natural History for over 50 years before apparently it stepped on evolutionary toes a little too much, and so it's now stuffed away in the basement, never to see the light of day again. However, it was well published on. It's a completely modern, articulated human skeleton, but it came from Miocene limestone, supposedly 28 million years old. So you notice I'm getting older and older as we go here, by evolutionary standards. So we have completely modern humans in rocks, supposedly dated by the evolutionists as 28 million years old. You can see why they still stash it away in the basement of the museum now. This defies evolutionary explanation. Now, usually when they find something like this, they say, oh, well, there was a crack in the ground, and this poor person fell into the crack and became fossilized way deeper. But no broken bones. They're all articulated. There's no evidence that there was any kind of a crack there. The evidence indicates that's where it was buried, in a flood. That's what the evidence indicates. So let's go back a little more. I have here a cast of what is known as the London artifact. Now, this was a hammer which was found by Max Hahn right at that waterfalls right there. He and his family were out fishing, and what they found was a rock with a piece of what they thought was petrified wood protruding out of it. And so they took the rock home, and they broke it open. Lo and behold, it wasn't just a piece of wood. It was actually the handle of a hammer. Now, that rock is supposed to be from the time of the dinosaurs, the Cretaceous period. What on earth is a clearly man-made artifact doing in the time of the dinosaurs? Now, some have suggested, some ridiculous suggestions, some have suggested that perhaps the Indians found a meteorite, and they just hammered it into a hammer, some smart Indian. Well, that makes no sense. Meteorites always have nickel. There's very little nickel in this. The other thing, which is the biggest claim to explain this, is that it was a modern hammer that was dropped into the rocks, which then formed a concretion around it and made it look fossilized. Let's examine that for a second. By the way, there's John Watson. Unfortunately, John died a couple of years ago, before I really got a chance to get to know him well. John is actually pointing to the layer. He is a geologist. He's pointing to the layer he identified as the source rock surrounding the hammer. And that's how he was able to nail down its specific geologic age, if you will. Now, here is the rock that was on top of the hammer. You'll notice, please, it's got some very nice fossil shells in it, lots of them. That's how one of the reasons John was able to identify the rock layer, is by the shells, but also by the context of the rock itself. Now, pay close attention to those shells, because here is an obviously modern artifact. Good old Champion spark plug. You can even see Champion still written on it. Obviously, the iron played a role in causing this concretion. And there's rocks in there, dirt. It's rock hard. It's actually turned it into rock. But it's also got shells. Now, here's the thing. All the rocks and all the shells within it have been abraded. They've been reworked. And so the suggestion by the skeptics was that the shells and the dirt had been reworked. They'd been worked out of the cliff face. That's why they're the same shells that are in the cliff face. They are actual fossil shells. But they were eroded out of the cliff face, washed downstream. The hammer was dropped into it, caused a concretion that caused everything to cement to it. However, shells especially, even fossil ones, get abraded very easily. Now, back home where I come from is a town called Eganville, and the Bonnechere River goes through there. Fantastic for fossils. It is absolutely awesome. There's layers there about this thick that is nothing but shells. Yet, the water has eroded all the limestone away. You can actually sit there and pick out shells you'd swear were buried yesterday. Supposedly 400 million years old. I don't buy that, but anyway, that's what they claim. They looked like they were buried yesterday. They've got their original color and everything. Yet, with all those shells being eroded out, you take a look in the river basin, you don't find any. Why? Because they're destroyed. That's how quickly they're destroyed by erosion and by reworking. So, the shells, again, get reworked. This was found on a beach, by the way, which doesn't get reworked as much as a river. Now, let's take a close look again at the shells surrounding that hammer. They're actually in very, very good shape. They show no sign of wearing, no sign of reworking. The shells you find in the rock layer are frequently broken like you find there, but the edges are still in very good shape. So this is clearly not just some concretion and reworked. There's the shells there. We don't just find hammers. Again, now we're going back more in time. That's supposed to be 60 million years old. Well, now I have a cast here of an iron pot. Now, the gentleman who found this was working at a coal mine in Oklahoma. And as the coal came in, there was a chunk of coal that was too big to be put in the fire. So Frank Kennard, the guy who discovered this, took the chunk of coal and he took a sledgehammer and he broke the coal into 2 smaller pieces. Not just in front of him, but in front of a second witness, this iron pot found out it fell out of the chunk of coal. Now this coal, he dated it, or he traced it to the Wilburton, Oklahoma coal mines, and incidentally, there is a copy of his affidavit right there, signed before a notary public. That's Frank Kennard's testimony right there, written and signed and notarized. He traced the coal from the Wilburton coal mines. The Wilburton coal mines coal is supposed to be 285 million years old. This is now before the time of the dinosaurs. Now, some have actually flat out stated that they would prefer to believe this was made by aliens than to assume that people made it and people were around from before the time of the dinosaurs. See, evolution has nothing to do with science or the facts. Evolution is a religion. And people believe it religiously, even believing such ludicrous things as aliens came by and accidentally dropped an iron pot, rather than coming to the obvious conclusion it's a man-made artifact in rocks that aren't supposed to be that old. That's simple. Furthermore, I forgot one as well. This is I'll show this around real quick over here before I show it to the cameras. You can take a close look at this later on. This is a fossil human finger. Specifically, it is the third finger from the left hand of a woman. And later on, if you take a close look at it, you can actually see the skin layers, the tendons, the muscles, the marrow of the bone, all preserved and even visible in the cast. Now, here's the thing. Now, did anybody lose a finger near Glen Rose, Texas, by chance? A lady? Nobody. Okay, just asking. This actually came. Now, there's been some misreports. Yes, it was found in gravels. However, the gravels it was found in was sandwiched between 2 layers of the walnut shale. This is from the time of the dinosaurs. So again, we have evidence that humans were around at the time of the dinosaurs. The two are kind of intimately related. Where do we see pyramids today? Where else? South America, Mexico, Peru. In fact, you find pyramids all over the world. Why would people be building pyramids all over the world? Seems like a strange oddity, and in fact, there are tons of similarities like this throughout all cultures around the world.